Namaste, I'm Brittany Shanae, bringing you life tips for the everyday. So, I wanted to talk about why silence is golden. The thing about silence is that it's distinctly different from quiet. Quiet is more so about the absence of noise, whereas silence is more so about not so much the absence of distraction, but the ability to not be distracted even if distractions are present. So for instance, when you're thinking about quiet, you're thinking about absolutely no noise. You're thinking about not having crying babies around, or not having a husband around, asking you to do stuff, or not having a dog barking in the background, or not having traffic noise. But silence is something that's more internal, whereas quiet is something that's more external. Silence is something that you have to obtain from within, even if there's noise going on the outside. So, for instance, those who are highly skilled in meditative practices like monks, monks, even though we tend to think as their environment where they have the benefit of being around mountains and beautiful waterfalls and in temples where it's nothing but sound bowls and incense, right? But the thing about monks is that they're so highly trained that even if they were in the middle of a New York highly trafficked area with people yelling and cars going by and trains and so on and so forth, they would be able to focus so deeply within that it wouldn't matter what was going on, regardless of the lack of quiet. They would still have an inner silence. So this particular topic was inspired by my drawing of a tarot, and the card is the Two of Swords. And if you look at the traditional Rider-Waite deck, is represented with a woman sitting blindfolded, holding two swords with her arms crossed over. And swords represent the element of air, which represents our mentality, or our thinking, our mental state, our conscious state, more so in the earthly realm as far as logic, not so much our spiritual subconscious, but our more material consciousness. And so we tend to think of things like the use of logic and strategy, and the ability to make decisions. Particularly for this card, it's about knowing how to be decisive, but taking a moment to think about it first. And in order to really come to conclusions, we have to stop and think, look within ourselves, really listen to what's going on inside of us in order to decide whether it's left or right. In this case, the crossed over chest with the two swords. When we have a hard time making decisions, we find that we're faced with a lot of mental clutter. I know I personally suffer from anxiety a lot, which usually means that I'm having a hard time shutting off my inward distraction, right? So even though I could be sitting in a completely quiet room, I could be facing a whole lot of inward distraction, which means that in spite of the lack of outside noise, I have yet to find my silence. So when finding silence, it can take time, and it can take training and a lot of practice and discipline, and this is often what yoga promotes. Particularly, people will often see asana, which is posture, but the postures are what's necessary in order to help prepare your body for reaching inward silence. When your body is warmed up, regardless of what's going on, it allows you to sort of sit and focus yourself within, and sort of thank yourself for what it is you were able to achieve externally, and focus within, right? Which is kind of hard to do when, say you're coming from work or dropping the kids off at school or making dinner, and you just kind of plop down and try to quiet your brain. That can be extremely difficult, except for maybe someone who lives in the mountains surrounded by singing bowls and incense, right? So for those of us who live in the Western world in particular, it's a little difficult to come from facing all of those outside distractions and frustrations and all the turmoil, and then having to sit down and have to somehow extinguish all of that at once and to find ourselves in the present. Instead, it's easier when we use asana to warm up our body so that we can learn how to focus inward when we sit down, but I digress. But my point is that asana is sort of a way to help bring us to the path of inward silence. So again, silence is something that we have to develop from within, and then we're able to sort of walk around with that silence. So no matter what we're facing, we're able to take that silence with us so that we can make those greater decisions, right? So let's use the example of relationships, right? So you get into an argument with your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whoever, and you're so busy thinking about what you're going to say next, you don't fully hear what it is that your partner has to say. Maybe they have a complaint about something you said or how you said it, or something you did or something you didn't do. And in your mind, you feel like, well, I don't understand why they're upset. And you have all of these defenses and reasons why, what you have to say about it is valid. Which, although not taking away from the validity of your argument, we somehow or sometimes take away the validity of what our partners have to say because we're so busy thinking of a response that we don't get to hear them out. And the best thing we can do is sometimes sit in that silence without the distractions of our defenses and the distractions of the debate and the distractions on how we're offended, or the distraction of being uncomfortable because someone's calling us out, that we fail to sit in the silence and to really hear what people are saying. That's the other thing, is that silence is distinct from quiet, and that it doesn't necessarily mean the absence of noise. Okay, so sometimes silence is being in touch with the still voice inside of us, or being in touch with the connection with other people. Sometimes we hear things in our heads, but there's a still voice. There's a difference between cluttered noise and anxiety versus the still voices that come to us, whether it's our higher selves, or if we like to think of it as gods and goddesses, different deities, or possibly our ancestors. If you practice ancestor veneration, or spirit guides. But it's not necessarily lack of noise or quiet, but it's a silence within us, right? So it's important we know the difference between what silence and quiet is. So I'm sure you've heard of the term, silence is golden, right? So now that you have a better understanding of what silence is, or I hope you have a better understanding of what silence is, that phrase has a new meaning for you. Silence is something that you carry with you from the inside, and it doesn't mean a lack of noise. In fact, it means that within you there is a stillness in spite of external noise, and that's something that you can take with you absolutely everywhere. You can take it with you in your dreams, you can take it with you at work, you can take it with you in your relationships, and you can take it in most certainly in your personal growth and how you communicate with yourself, so that you can make better decisions, so that you can understand your partners in interpersonal relationships, and so that you know how to move forward and be able to hear better from your guides and your ancestors and your higher self. So I do hope that you found this video helpful. If you like the video, I ask that you hit the like button and subscribe, and leave any questions or comments down in the comment section below. And follow my blog at www.brittanyshanae.com. I will leave a link at the bottom in the description box. I will see you all soon, and namaste.